We're committed to protecting 25% of our oceans by 2025, but we're the only country who've committed to these pledges.
Those are totally political decisions. The commercial fishery in BC is being used as a political pawn.
If you can't come back with the fish that you need, those people don't get the fish to eat either, right?
To take food off people's tables is just wrong.
Every Indigenous person can see it. Back to the same old again, boys.
Yeah.
Back to the same old thing. We don't get to say again.
This is a fish processing plant in Nanaimo, BC, part of Canada's robust fish and seafood sector that feeds millions of Canadians every single year. But for how much longer? As Ottawa's plan to create a series of underwater parks, all in the name of protecting the environment, threatens to cripple towns, cost thousands of jobs, and put in jeopardy the very sustainability of an entire industry. But is this a necessary sacrifice to protect a coastline that Canadians know and love? Or is it just another political, ideological decision that accomplishes nothing, risks everything, and leaves the livelihood of thousands of Canadian fishermen hanging by a thread?
I don't know why it's happening because it doesn't make any sense.
I mean, who has the biggest interest in sustaining fisheries? It's the people who make their living at it.
I not only depend on fishing, I love it. I want it to stay around, but I don't know what I would do.
My name is Aaron Gunn, and this is Politics Explained.
The value of the seafood industry in the province topped $1.4 billion last year, but there's a problem.
So 7 years ago, when our government took office, we knew we had to do something big that was ambitious and that makes sure that Canada is doing everything necessary to protect our waters.
Along with the fur trade, there is maybe no other industry in Canada more central to its history, development, and identity than that of fishing. Beginning in the 16th century, large European fleets began fishing off Canada's coasts, while for Indigenous Canadians, it has served as an essential source of sustenance and cultural significance for thousands of years. Today, the commercial fishing industry is primarily divided between Canada's Atlantic and Pacific coasts, contributing more than $10 billion annually to the Canadian economy and employing more than 60,000 people, serving as the key economic driver for many coastal communities and a way of life for countless Canadians. But the industry's past has been anything but smooth sailing, defined by boom and bust cycles, job losses, and at times, economic devastation. Most prominently in the early 1990s following the collapse of the northern cod fishery off the coast of Newfoundland.
For at least the next 2 years, much of Newfoundland will lose a way of life. It's a moratorium on fishing for northern cod, a ban that will affect about 20,000 people and gut the backbone of the Atlantic fishery.
6 generations down the line passed down, and he's done nothing but S-H-I-T to us.
And with that, fishermen stormed the doors of John Crosby's news conference.
Get out of the way!
Inside, the fisheries minister tried to ignore the banging and explain why he just shut down a 400-year-old fishery.
I'm making a decision based on the desire to ensure that the northern cod survives as a species.
To learn more about the collapse of Newfoundland's cod fishery and its impact across the country, I sat down with Ray Hilborn, a marine biologist, university professor, and expert in fishery stock assessments, including what's known as overfishing. What role, from your observation, obviously working in this industry, was overfishing? Did that play a role with the cod collapse in Newfoundland?
Oh yeah, I mean there's no question that, particularly for the big cod stock, I think there's no question that overfishing was a major cause of its decline. But almost everything collapsed in eastern, all the ground fish, all the cod stocks in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There's their productivity, that is, how many babies they had, just went way down. Several years before the collapse, they had realized that they had been grossly overestimating the population size. And certainly many people in the science community were calling for major reductions in the TAC. But there were other voices that said, no, things are things are okay, and then it just imploded over a relatively short period of 2 years. Again, I'm talking specifically the northern cod stock, the really big one.
Despite scientific warnings, including from the Department of Fisheries itself, that the TAC, or total allowable catch, was set too high, politicians refused to listen, acutely aware of the votes in play in Atlantic Canada and unwilling to make the difficult decisions needed as a result, the consequences of which were devastating. 40,000 jobs lost, total groundfish catch reduced by 87%, and in 1992, a total moratorium on the northern cod fishery altogether. All consequences that have since shaped the nature and design of fisheries management here in Canada.
The collapse of cod in eastern Canada just made an enormous difference, because from then on, the objective was to not overfish. It was, before it had really been to maintain economically viable fisheries with a rather light touch. But since then, both in Canada, the U.S., and most developed world, they've really, the cardinal sin is overfishing.
Since the late 1960s, Canada began instituting a series of reforms to better protect against overfishing and manage the boom and bust cycle common to the industry, leading to dramatic changes for fishermen and Canada's coastal communities.
In the 50s and 60s, it was what we call open access. That if you wanted to become a fisherman, you would go out and pay $100 and get a permit to become and then get a boat or whatever you were going to catch them with. And then starting in the 70s, most Canadian fisheries went into what are called limited entry programs, where there was a fixed number of permits. But the regulation has just gotten much, much better over time.
And yet, despite these changes, serious concerns remain, particularly on Canada's Pacific coast, where the composition of British Columbia's fisheries have changed dramatically.
In the 70s and 80s, salmon and herring were king. They were 85% of the total.
And now?
Now less than 20, okay? Salmon catch was in the order of 100,000 tons. Now we've had several, if we get 20,000 tons, it's a good year.
And is that driven by, because we were talking to Ray about this yesterday, do you think is that driven by environmental factors, overfishing, a combination? What's, from your perspective?
I think it's mostly environmental factors. Humans and salmon compete over cold water, and humans are always going to win. I mean, all the urban development along the Fraser and other rivers.
A lot of the coho declines is because of urbanization, right? So it's, streams, culverts getting put in and that type of thing. Because there used to be coho all up and down all these streams on East Coast Vancouver Island, and now there's less than that sort of urbanization.
If it was fishing practices are the major problem, if you cut down dramatically on fishing opportunities, which has happened.
Yeah.
You would have seen a rebound, right?
Whereas they cut back on the fishing and hasn't rebounded.
I mean, yes.
Since the 1990s, salmon stocks in British Columbia have declined dramatically, and as a result, so too have the fishing quotas the government allows. But where have all the salmon gone? And is it only urban development that has driven them all away?
Most of the decline in salmon, as near as we can tell, has largely been due to changes in the ocean conditions. Same thing was happening in the lower 48. Salmon production after the 1970s was declining, whereas farther north in Alaska and Russia, it was booming. So there's actually more Pacific salmon in the ocean now than at any time in recorded history.
Really?
But they're mostly in Alaska and Russia.
They're just in different places.
They're in different places. So where I work in Alaska, we've had record runs for the past 6 years. Last year we had the biggest run in history, 80 million or 83 million salmon. We were processing more salmon in a day in Bristol Bay, more sockeye salmon, than Canada does in a year.
But while Canada's reforms and robust fisheries management has earned praise from around the world, for some environmental groups, it hasn't gone far enough, as an alliance of environmental NGOs, including the Sierra Club, David Suzuki Foundation, and Greenpeace, have pushed for what's referred to as marine protected areas, otherwise known as MPAs or underwater parks. But what are these MPAs, and how could they impact commercial and even recreational fishing as a result?
Marine protected areas are areas that are where there are some regulations to protect biodiversity. So the most extreme is where no human use is allowed.
Well, it's an area of the ocean in which certain activities are restricted. It may be fishing, it may be ecotourism boats, it could be a whole bunch of things.
In 2023, one of these MPAs was created in an area known as Knights Inlet, located between Vancouver Island and mainland BC, closing the area off to fishermen and fishing families that, in some cases, had been fishing the inlet for generations. I met with one such family, Joel and Melissa Collier, as they prepared to head out for a prawning season shrouded in uncertainty and unknowns.
Well, I grew up in a fishing family, so still the same boat that we're on today, and I guess we just carried on, and when I got the opportunity to take over the boat, I took it. I'm a fourth generation fisherman, and I want my kids to be fifth. Before they came up with the whole MPA thing, it felt like we were going to have no problem making it through our career and into our kids fishing, and now it's like, are we going to make it in 5 years if they come in with this? I don't know. We might be looking for new jobs. I'm not sure.
Unlike many other fisheries in Canada, the prawn fishery in BC operates as what's known as a Derby-style fishery, meaning instead of being governed by quotas, they're governed by season length, opening for only a short period of time, usually a matter of weeks, during which fishermen are expected to get their catch for the entire year.
Typically the first week or 2 weeks is the majority of the prawns come in. You don't want to open somewhere new that you haven't been and take the chance of not getting anything. I mean, there is a lot of this coastline does not have any prawns, and if you don't know those areas pretty well, you can definitely miss them. So.
And you guys are leaving Friday. That's the plan. Yeah. What's the uncertainty level, stress level like right now?
Very high.
Other seasons, I felt like I was going into something there. I had a reasonable expectation of how it was going to play out, and I had 4 different scenarios where my gear is going to go, and depending on who shows up. And now it's a whole new ball game, right?
But the new marine protected area in Knights Inlet, which has been the source of so much stress to Melissa and Joel, turns out is only the tip of the iceberg. In 2019, the Trudeau government announced plans to quote-unquote protect 25% of Canada's land and coastal waters by 2025, before later signing a United Nations declaration known as 30 by 30. But what does protecting or preserving this land and water really mean? Well, no one really knows, and as always, the devil is in the details.
And now there is this movement, again, very strict, and it's 30 by 30. It means 30% of both the land and the ocean protected by 2030. It's totally up to the country to decide what level of protection. All of Western Canada is a marine protected area in the sense that that various extractive activities, such as fishing, are regulated to protect some part of biodiversity. It's really been distorted by the advocacy groups to say, well, ocean protection is really about stopping fishing.
But while one might argue, as Professor Hilborn has done, that the entirety of Canada's coastline is already a marine protected area due to existing fisheries management and regulation, the Trudeau government reached a decidedly different conclusion, announcing in 2019 an unprecedented series of MPAs in what's known as the Northern Shelf bioregion that could remove up to 40% of commercial and recreational fishing grounds off the coast of BC. But what exactly, other than fulfilling an arbitrary commitment, is the government trying to accomplish? What are their objectives? And is there any science to back up their approach? I posed these questions to Dennis Rutherford, a prawn biologist and former shellfish section head at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans.
This northern shelf bioregion's been talked about a lot in relation to these marine protected areas. Can you describe to people what that is or what that's proposed to be?
Yeah, well, the Northern Shelf bioregion is going to be a series of spatial closures spread from northern Vancouver Island up to the Alaska border. It's actually, from a science person, it's unclear to me what the actual objectives are for the northern boundary. We've got the current stock assessment going on. We've got the precautionary approach and sustainable fisheries framework. So these pieces are already there, and to ensure conservation. What they're attempting to do is unclear to me.
Yeah, well, what is the objective?
Yeah.
If the objective isn't clear, it's not clear what the best way to achieve the objective.
It's a distraction of energy and resources that go into all of this planning and stuff that really could be much better focused on solving the real problems. And I, certainly in developed countries like Canada and the US, I haven't seen any evidence that they solve any of the problems they're supposed to solve. Now, if you go to places where fisheries are poorly regulated, like the Mediterranean Sea or South and Southeast Asia, and say, yeah, they would have great benefit there. But that's not where you see them put in. They're being put in the rich countries where you've got very strong environmental lobbies.
Are they made to work in conjunction with the existing fishery management practices, or are they completely separate, like they don't?
They're being done totally independent of the current stock assessment, the current science, and the current fisheries management systems.
It's not being driven by science at all. It's being driven by environmental pressure groups. Now, what they will claim is the science shows that you get more fish, that that the biodiversity is higher. But that's generally pretty bogus. There's really almost no evidence that you get more fish in a country that already manages its fisheries reasonably well.
But while the environmental upside of MPAs might be, if we're being generous, hypothetical, the economic consequences clearly are not. To get a first-hand account of how these massive closures will affect an industry that feeds millions of Canadians every single year, I headed out on the water off the coast of Nanaimo, BC.
We're going to see the skipper and then the boat. Graham Millichip has, I think he's third, possibly fourth. I know he's third generation fishing family. Their incomes have been fishing for, I don't know, 100 years. Prawns, but he's involved in multi fisheries. You have to be involved in several different fisheries, otherwise you don't get enough work. So. So Graham is, I think he's about maybe 40. Right. But he's probably been on a boat since he was about 2 or 3. So.
And you're from a multi-generational fishing family. You talked a bit about that.
Fourth generation. Yeah.
What was your first time on a prawn boat?
Ooh. I started prawn fishing when I was probably 12, maybe, on the weekends with my uncle.
Yeah.
When I was right when I graduated high school, actually, I went out full time, like for prawns and then fishing. And then I started running a boat when I was 18.
Well, you've been doing this for a while. I feel like when people think about kind of environmental concerns with regard to fisheries, it's usually sustainability. Have you noticed, like, are the prawns still here?
Oh yeah, prawns is managed very sustainably. Yeah.
The prawn stock assessment is really well recognized. Alaska, other jurisdictions have actually looked at the BC model. So what it starts with, like anything, is data, scientifically defensible data.
They cycle through the boats in this area and they check for how many females per trap. Basically an average per trap, and once it gets down below a certain threshold, they shut the area down.
What do you think, I don't think this area is directly affected, but what do you think the effect will be on you of, the federal government wants to do this thing where they close off a huge swath of kind of coastal BC to any kind of fishery, obviously including prawns?
Well, we're not even sure what it entails because they haven't told us they haven't finalized the areas that they're going to close. If they go through with closing the areas that they have proposed, it's going to have a massive devastating effect to the whole fishery and to all the fisheries that we have on our coast, because all the vessels and all the people that rely on fishing up there are going to be forced to come and fish somewhere else.
If this tiny little area is having such a big impact in the areas that we fish, imagine what it's going to be like when they reduce the fishing access by 40-50%. It's going to be a huge displacement shifting all over the coast and a lot of uncertainty. People aren't going to really know what to do.
So this, what you're facing this season is kind of small potentially to what's down the road and what's coming around the corner.
I think it's just this precursor.
It's a pin drop compared to what's coming to us. Mm-hmm. If the government goes through with, with the new picture they've made.
Everybody's expenses are going to go up per pound for the amount of product that comes out, because the same amount of product is going to come out of that area. The people that are doing it are going to make less money, and the expenses and the environmental impact is going to go up.
Putting a lot more fishing pressure on those areas that still have productive prawns, and it's going to clean up a lot quicker. So can you effectively go in there and sample those boats to close it down in time? Sometimes the data that we send in, doesn't seem like we get any feedback on it for a week. So during that week, if you've doubled the amount of boats fishing it, is it still safe? I don't know.
These massive spatial closures throughout coastal BC risk displacing hundreds of commercial and recreational fishing vehicles, forcing them into an ever-shrinking area and, in doing so, increasing the risk of localized overfishing, economic insolvency, and, in an industry known for being fiercely territorial, the risk of tension and even confrontation on the high seas.
It's going to create a massive amount of tension. Yeah, 100%. So for an area, any given area that's going to be left open, there's going to be people that already fish that area, and they have built their entire livelihood on fishing that area, and they raise their family, and their crew raises their family based on the income that they can estimate that they're going to make fishing that area. And if they have a couple other guys that come up and vie for the ground that they're fishing, it's not necessarily stealing money out of their pocket, but in a sense it is. It's taking from what they would have made, and it's distributing it.
And at the same time, I guess it's hard to blame them.
It's hard to blame them, yeah. No, it's going to be, but it's going to create a lot of tensions. There's going to be people that are upset with the government. There's going to be people that are upset with the other fishermen.
There's already tension now. I can't imagine what it's going to be like once you take away all that productive ground and shove everybody else in together.
If you have a species that isn't moving and you close a big portion of its fishing grounds, then you're going to reduce how much you can basically catch, and you're going to force in a fishery like that where people don't have quotas, they just have the right to go fishing. You're gonna dramatically impact their income. You're going to impact how many prawns are available to the public to eat.
This whole Northern Shelf Bioregion Marine Protected Plan is almost a worst case scenario. It's going to be devastating. There's going to be years of turmoil, tons of people that are going to lose their jobs. There's going to be tons of businesses that rely on the commercial fishing industry that are going to be shut down. There's going to be fish plants that are going to shut down. There's going to be truck drivers that are going to get displaced. The little guys, the smaller operations are most likely going to get put out of business. The guys that are just investing, that are heavily in debt, they're going to be put in a position where they're probably going to default on their loans.
So it's that uncertainty and that unknown that is absolutely terrifying. And since marine protected areas were announced, fishermen on this coast have been stressed out and just wondering what the future holds. And it's been years in the making.
You know, you're taking a pie and you're shrinking it down, and you're just, you know, everyone's they still want their piece, but the pie is not as big anymore.
Are you a little concerned if this industry is even going to be here when your kids are old enough to take over?
Well, I got 4. I have a 2-month-old baby boy and 3 girls. I don't know. I like to think so. I like to hope so. But if I was going to bet on it, I would say that it's going to be a fraction of what it is today.
But while it might seem slightly obvious how the massive maritime closures will affect geographically consistent fisheries like prawns, how might they affect other fisheries where the fish in question actually move? To find out, I headed to one of the oldest fishing capitals of British Columbia, the northern Vancouver Island city of Port Hardy. So we're here now in Port Hardy, British Columbia, right at the tip of Vancouver Island. This small town used to be a hub, an epicenter of commercial fishing activity really throughout the province before it was devastated in the early 1990s or so when the federal government curtailed a lot of the fishing activity. And now what remains of that commercial fishing industry that puts the food on our table and in the grocery store shelves is seriously concerned that the federal government is about to do it all over again, except this time for no environmental benefit whatsoever. We're going to talk to some of these commercial fishermen. We're going to talk to some of the people at the processing plants to see what they have to say. Once in Port Hardy, I met with Wes and Dale Erickson and the crew of the Ocean Quest, a longline halibut vessel preparing to set out for the waters of northern BC. I wanted to know if these marine protected areas could affect not only prawns, but fisheries such as halibut and vessels like the Ocean Quest as well.
I'm a 4th generation commercial fisherman. I've been full-time on a boat since I was 6 years old.
And you guys, brothers?
We're brothers. We're brothers, yeah.
Who's the better fisherman?
Well, I'm the captain.
First mate up here?
Yeah. So first mate, Sherry Hansen. I've been fishing now for 20 years. Thought it would just be a summer gig, and it turned into my career. And I support my family with my earnings from commercial fishing.
My name is Theo Stu. I'm from the Wewak Nation as well as the Haida Nation. I grew up a salmon and herring fisherman since I was 13. As for halibut, actually, Dale hired me off my dad's boat probably, 10 years ago? Yeah, you came out on the boat with us and you hired me off his boat onto yours. And I just kind of never looked back since.
And what do you like about fishing? You didn't grow up near the ocean, eh?
No, I don't know, everything's pretty new, I guess. I liked it that it just takes you away from like the screen time and everything.
Yeah.
Keeps you away from always the internet and stuff.
You guys are multi-generational fishermen. Are the halibut disappearing?
The halibut the halibut resource is strong. There is no problem, and all of the groundfish resource here is strong. It's managed so conservatively. There is no problem with it whatsoever.
Since the dramatic reduction of salmon off BC's coast, popular groundfish, including halibut, sole, lingcod, and rockfish species, have formed the new backbone of Canada's Pacific fisheries, while continuing to play an important role in Atlantic Canada as well. Groundfish are caught using either long-lining vessels that employ long main lines with baited hooks, or what's known as trawlers, commercial fishing vessels that actively pull a trawl or net behind it, and are governed by quotas set by the Government of Canada, or, in the case of halibut, the International Pacific Halibut Commission, all to ensure a sustainable yield for generations to come.
Every vessel was assigned a share of the quota, and the idea behind that was it made it that you no longer race to fish to try to catch the fish before the other guy, but you knew what you could catch, and your job was to catch the highest quality fish at the lowest cost.
Every vessel at the International Pacific Halibut Commission, every year they decide on how much BC will be allowed to take out of the water, and each vessel then is allowed 1% of the total allowable catch. This year it's a little under 60,000 pounds of halibut that this vessel will be able to bring in.
Certainly the US and Canada will always err on the side of not being any danger of overfishing, because that's the sin, and giving up a fair amount of potential harvest by being so cautious.
Over the past 3 decades, to ensure quota compliance and sustainability into the future, the groundfish industry has embarked on a series of dramatic reforms, many of which were encouraged by fishermen themselves, up to and including a catch monitoring system that features cameras on every fishing deck and a verified offloading process that ensures every single fish is counted along the way.
Everybody was involved in getting together to try and meet a set of objectives. And we did, and we ended up having cameras on board. Those cameras would be audited. Every fish, whether retained or released, is now accounted for.
Well, there's been a huge change on the groundfish side because of the catch monitoring, okay? And so I believe they went to DMP, Dockside Monitoring Program, where all landings or offloads at ports were counted, whereas before it was an estimate and stuff. And so this is a huge advancement in science and the integrity of the whole science function.
And so the ask of what Wes said here is of the fishing industry has really done, it's quite extraordinary. Just not only accounting for safety issues, but looking after to maintain the health of the stocks. And I think a lot of these organizations are really forgetting that we're the guys out here. You know, we're the guys in the storms. We're the guys who are like looking after every single fish that we can. And sometimes I don't feel there's enough respect for that.
But if the groundfish industry is already tightly and sustainably managed using a quota-based monitoring system, what environmental impact will these marine protected areas have? And is it possible they could actually make the situation worse? I asked these questions to Walter Fitzpatrick, a trawl boat captain who happened to be offloading his catch during my visit to Port Hardy.
This fish is totally sustainable as it is right now. But with this with these new regulations, the government's coming in with the closed areas and stuff, that's all going to change, I believe. Because we're going to have the same amount of fish to catch, but it's going to be all have to be caught in a much smaller area. So everybody's going to concentrate in that smaller area to catch the same fish that we're catching all over the coast. It's going to get wiped out. It won't be sustainable eventually, because there's no way we have the same amount of quota and we're going to lose 40% of our fishing area. So I mean, anybody could do the math on that.
But you don't have more fish overall because the fishing boats are simply somewhere else, sometimes on the edge of the park, catching the same number of fish, particularly in the way we manage fish now, which is by quotas. So if you put in marine protected areas, you don't change the quota, so the catch really stays the same. It's just you force the fishermen to go somewhere else, which usually means they get less fish per day because you've closed the best places, that's where they were, and they're burning more fuel, they're having more environmental impact, they're making less money. The second big impact of fishing that is typically a concern is bycatch. And marine protected areas don't solve a bycatch problem.
Bycatch in the fishing industry is a fish or other marine species that is caught unintentionally and which fishermen are restricted or penalized for catching, theoretically for ecological concerns. For this reason, many of the preferred fishing grounds in Canada have limited bycatch population. However, if the fleets are forced to move because of government-imposed MPAs, this could change dramatically.
Because of species like yellow eye, where you're trying to avoid them because you can't target them, and you're trying to move away from where the yellow eye are, we are kind of pinholed into spots right now. And then if those areas are closed, I don't know what's going to happen with the whole bycatch issue, right? You can throw a string in the water and accidentally catch thousands of pounds of yellow eye, and you're only allowed like 180 pounds in one area and 300 pounds in another area.
We will be impacting other species, probably like shark species or skate, the whole elasmobranch family that they're concerned about as well too, that we effectively are able to avoid now with the area we have to work in.
Spatial closures don't work for managing bycatch. Just plain and simple, and that's being documented. So, yeah, so there's another aspect where there's a little bit of a mismatch.
And so now we've learned all these new areas and different areas and know where we can fish responsibly and sustainably and not catch too much bycatch. But now they're closing more of those areas.
Pushed out again.
Yeah.
But to just get back, like concentrating fleets, it's the same question. Like, let's say you have a bottom contact fishery. Do you want to move them and have all your bottom contact occurring in a small or a condensed area, or do you want a little bit of bottom contact spread out through the coast? What's better?
I just have to say to the people who are advocating marine protection, what problem you're trying to solve, what's the evidence that it's the most effective tool to solve that problem? And if it's overfishing, they're clearly not the most effective tool. If it's bycatch, they're not the most effective tool.
The federal government has no idea what goes on in the BC fishery. BC commercial fishery is one of the best managed fisheries on the planet. But our federal government don't recognize that at all.
What happened was that they took our information, our data from all our fishing years and our camera footage, our GPS footage, and all the spots that we'd fished, and they took all of the what they call the hot spots. They showed them on the maps they had, and all the hot spots were the places where we traditional fish, and that's the places that they want to close.
We know it's going to cost us more. We know that we're going to have bycatch issues as a result of being pushed into other areas. And another thing we know for sure is that the fleet will be concentrated into a smaller area.
The red tape is just piling up, more regulations, and it's tough to keep up. We used to be a 4-man boat, now we're down to 3-men because of the cost of everything else is just to stay in the industry.
Yeah.
The government is just regulating us out of business, really.
Well, just like what you said, I guess it's going to, at a certain point when it becomes less economical, it just stops. Because you can't do it at a certain point.
We really can't cut back any more on manpower on the boat. We're down to 3 guys.
Yeah. Do you think some boats be forced to exit the industry?
100%. Probably me. I mean, the cost of doing business is getting higher, and this just puts another nail or two in the coffin. Or 4 nails in my coffin. The way it's looking for us.
And if fishermen like Dale are forced to abandon the industry and their way of life, the domino effect for many coastal communities could be overwhelming. In fact, towns like Port Hardy, which before the decline of Pacific salmon had booming fishing industries, are already in many ways hanging by a thread. I met with Mickey Flanagan, the CEO of Celtic Seafoods in Port Hardy, BC, to learn more about how the decline of the fishing industry affected his community and what could happen next.
How much has the fishing industry changed since you've been here in Port Hardy?
Drastically. It's not even, there's no parallel to what it was. Big money, big activity in the whole harbor here. The secondary industry spin-off was enormous. When I started in this industry, there was canneries and fish plants up and down the whole coast, up in every inlet and every harbor on the inside of the island and outside, all the way up the way to Prince Rupert. There is no canneries left in BC now on the west coast. The canning is all done up in Alaska. The processing plants now, those are disappearing all the time as well. If we continue to have less access to the resource and closures, there'll be less boats, there'll be less activity on the water, less fishermen. The fish coming to the plants are going to be reduced or eliminated. The decisions become pretty clear. It becomes a financial decision. It's just not viable to operate anymore. The plants close. And with that, the jobs disappear. With that, people relocate to larger communities, and the small coastal community loses.
And if plants like Celtic Seafoods are forced to close, there may be no single group more negatively affected than Indigenous Canadians, who make up a huge percentage of the commercial fishing workforce in BC's small coastal communities, and who rely on the industry for jobs that are often in short supply.
And what, is it a good job? You enjoy working here?
I love working here.
Yeah?
Yeah, I love it.
What do you enjoy about it?
I love the money.
Yeah?
No?
That's a good reason. That's a good reason.
There we go. No, I love the ocean. I love the camaraderie of the team. Our unit is really close-knit.
Yeah.
A lot like family.
Yeah. What kind of devastation would it cause on the community if a bunch of these jobs went away? I mean, if we lost, half the fishing boats, probably lose half the processing jobs as well.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Would that be really hard for a community like Port Hardy?
It sure would, it sure would. Well, there's a joke that says Port Hardy is a small drinking village with a fishing problem. And that's sort of the flip side of the coin. My girlfriend, for example, like I said, it keeps her sober, right? So if she's not working, she's tempted to go fall off the wagon. And a lot of people actually, it keeps them sane, keeps them out of trouble, and keeps them sheltered. For example, in July we have what's called Filomi Days, which stands for fishing, logging, and mining. Where's the mining? The mining's gone. Where's the logging? The logging's kind of pretty low, and now the fishing. So it's really the identity of our community that's at stake in a way, and there's not a lot of employment opportunities, particularly for Indigenous people, speaking on behalf.
I don't know, it would devastate everyone here. There was nowhere else to go but here, type of thing. I don't know how it would be if they had to shut this place down or shut any fish plant or any fish industry down. I think that's one of the most negative things to think of, to try to shut the businesses down that feeds the table for everyone, type of thing.
But if the collapse of the fishing industry could devastate Indigenous communities in a town like Port Hardy, what would happen to First Nations that were even more remote and even more dependent on commercial fishing for their sustenance, economy, and way of life? To find out, I traveled to one of the most remote Indigenous villages in British Columbia, where few documentary film crews have visited before. Accessible only by boat, and just 25 kilometers from the Alaskan border. This is Lax Kw'alaam, home of the proud Coast Tsimshian people and one of the few remaining fish processing plants in the region. I met with the mayor of Lax Kw'alaam to find out just how important the plant and fishing more broadly was to his people and community.
In our community, it's always been important fishing community. We still have the largest fleet in the north here of fishermen with goat and commercial. Yeah, it's really important that we've always depended on that in our community. And, we're a fishing community and we haven't changed. We're still the same, and a lot of our people depend on that.
We own the processing plant. We renovated the processing plant in 2012. Also, we own 2 groundfish trawlers. We're heavily involved in the groundfish business. We pivoted away from salmon just because of the fluctuations. Groundfish is more stable for us. It helps us pay the bills. The revenues are marginal, but it creates a lot of employment throughout the year. Supports the community in a big way.
It's massive here. Yeah. This is the largest employer for the community is the fish plant. Currently, right today, we got about 50 people working in the plant, and we have about 74 people that we've working off and on the boats.
This must be kind of pretty center part of the community. Like there's lots of people working here. Everybody's talking about what happened on the weekend or stuff like that.
You know, like with the workers, as they're handling that fish, you know, they're treating it like they're going to eat it. You know, because we are feeding the world. And when we first started seeing all these different species, we've never been exposed to that before.
Yeah.
Because we're salmon people.
Yeah.
And now we're ground fish.
Yeah. And what kind of fish are you guys bringing in here?
Yeah, we bring in all the ground fish. It's there's a lot of different species, from turbot, sole, cod, rockfish.
And that's what you guys, there's some sorting going on behind you. Is that what they're doing? Throwing the different bins for the different sizes or different kinds of fish?
Yeah, both different sizes and different types of fish. That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. And do a lot of people just fish recreationally too if they're not commercial fishermen?
100% if they're not at work and they got a day off, then they're out with their rods in the water or their nets.
Do you feel it in your blood kind of when you get out on the...
Oh, it's definitely in the blood.
But what happens when something as economically and culturally significant as fishing to the Coast-Tsimshian people gets taken away? What, for this small community, might the consequences be?
We target 7 million pounds of groundfish per year to keep us in the black. If we were to lose 20 to 40% of our harvesting area and 40% of our volume, our plant would go backwards real quick. We would probably go bankrupt. First of all, the banks are going to be knocking on our doors, right? They'll be knocking on the band office doors. People will lose their jobs. It would be devastating. It would not only take our people off the water, where we've been on the water for thousands of years, like I've said. It would have a devastating impact on our culture.
Oh, it would have a devastating impact on the community, and it would be a rippling effect, forcing people to go on social assistance. Yeah. You know, their morale would drop down, suicide, stuff like this.
When we first opened up the fish plant again in 2012, we saw a lot of our members driving around brand new trucks. They're renovating their homes, they're getting mortgages. All of that would be taken away from them. And you can imagine waking up one day and you just lose everything. There's something very wrong about that. It begs the question, who are they trying to appease? Do they even know what's running the economy here? Do they know what the social fabric looks like here? I don't think they do. You take a look around, where are the environmental groups? They're not here. Have they ever come to talk to us? I don't think so.
Have they? Have they reached out?
Never.
They don't have a clue back east there to see what's going on up here and what my community is about and what we depend on. When it comes to a decision like that, we should be consulted, and that hasn't happened.
Our community, Prince Rupert, they depend on the fishing community too. So can you imagine if that was all taken away? Prince Rupert would be a ghost town too, because it's a fishing community. A lot of the business depend on that. If you take that away, it's not going to be good.
There is maybe no other Canadian city that more clearly embodies the collapse of British Columbia's fisheries than Prince Rupert. A town that was once one of the wealthiest in the province has, since 1996, lost more than 25% of its entire population and the majority of its fishing infrastructure. And with 40% of BC's remaining fishing grounds threatened with imminent closure, many fishermen fear what remains does so on borrowed time.
Already, if you walk around Prince Rupert, you can see the impacts, I would say, from the cut of fishing already. If we lost what we are clinging on to as it is, I don't know what these communities would do.
Fishing has always been a huge part of Prince Rupert. It's a large part of why the town is here. Myself specifically, I don't know what I would do. I mean, I have my wife here, I have 2 young girls, I have a 2.5-year-old and a 9-month-old baby. You know, I not only depend on fishing, I love it. I want it to stay around, but I don't know what I would do.
We're sitting beside old fish plants that are long gone, and now it's different industries, and I think actually Rupert now, we're down to 1 place to offload in Rupert and 1 ice plant. So this whole area went from over a dozen to 2. If they said you can't go to your number 1, 2, and 3 spots because they're closed, that just might be the end of it. This little box, we're only allowed to fish in there.
Really? So
what about so this used to be all wide open.
Any more cuts, or especially area, I think would really be devastating.
Amidst all of the economic turmoil and uncertainty, only one processing plant of the nearly dozen that used to exist has chosen to remain in the Prince Rupert area, Arrow Trading, and its president and CEO, Brad Moreau.
You can look around Prince Rupert now, and most of my competitors have already closed up shop. And so they've obviously decided that they've reached that threshold. It's hard to believe we're the only remaining processor in the Prince Rupert area.
Can you talk about what did it used to be like, this town at its peak?
Oh, I mean, when I moved here, when you came across on the ferry from the airport, you could see the waterfront was alive with boats and activity. There was Prince Rupert Fishermen's Co-op, J.S. McMillan, BC Packers, Ocean Fisheries. The waterfront probably employed 2,000 to 3,000 people. Now there's probably 100. A lot of the boats have been sold to Alaska. If you go visit the Alaskan ports and docks, you can see a huge number of the boats used to be fishing in BC, and they moved up there. The impact could be huge. Northern Shelf bioregion is like 100,000 square kilometers, I think, of ocean. I think the layman, the average person might think, well, if you close half of the area or 25% of the area, you can just go fish somewhere else. But all of the different species of fish don't live in all of the square kilometers of water. Port Ed, for my plant, for my staff, for my fishermen, what does it mean? Probably less people working, less fish landing, higher costs. I could see if the reallocations or the closures are severe enough, I'd hate to think that we would have to close, but without access, again, we don't have a business model. We exist to process fish.
If we start losing fish plants, it doesn't matter. They don't just pop up overnight. So say we lose some of the major processors and some of the offloading facilities and some of the fuel docks and some of the gear stores, because they need the commercial fleet, and if we start losing guys, they don't have any other way to make up their revenue.
I guess if you lose that critical mass, you could lose the entire industry.
It will.
And without commercial fishermen, processing plants, or anything resembling a fishing industry, what would that mean for Canada's food security and the ecological impact around the globe?
We produce probably somewhere in the range of 50,000 meals per landing. So, if this shuts down for us or cuts back for us, those meals have to come from somewhere else. And, what do? Keep buying more fish from China just to fill our shelves in the store when we could be doing it ourselves?
All those the cameras, all these different rules. You've got a pretty big, impressive company here. You ship all over the world. Do you have a feeling for, is this pretty par for the course in Asia and all over the place of how they manage their fisheries, or does Canada do it a bit differently? Or are we kind of leading the pack?
Have you traveled around the world to look at fisheries?
We have some of the cleanest, most pristine waters in BC. We have incredibly regulated fisheries. We have fishermen who care about the sustainability and long-term life of our industry. And we have this great resource that we can feed our communities. And if you take all of that away, or even handicap it to the point that we have way less amount of seafood we can offer, where are you going to get it from? You're going to be bringing it in from other countries that have questionable environmental practices, questionable labor practices, questionable seafood from what waters? You don't know. Why wouldn't we want to support our own industry from our own country, especially when it's so well regulated and we have such amazing seafood here?
And it's seafood from boats like Joel and Melissa's that feeds millions of Canadians every single year, from grocery store shelves to delicious restaurant meals, and even, in the case of Zeke Pellegrin, fresh off his boat in the city where I call home, Campbell River, BC.
More and more people on the planet every day that need to eat. So yeah, we have to harvest, and we have to harvest all these things in a sustainable way. I've been doing this for, I'm 48 years old and I've been fishing since I was 12. So this is my 36th year fishing. I'm proud of what I do, and I'm proud to produce, not just make money off this industry, but I produce food for thousands of Canadians. And I think, I'm proud of that. And I think it's something that's honorable and it's something that's needed.
For more than 2 decades, Zeke and his wife Angie have sold fresh and frozen seafood products directly from both his boat and his home, recently opening a small home-based storefront to serve their many hungry customers. But the recent changes announced by the Trudeau government to enact massive closures off BC's coast has left Zeke wondering if the industry will even be able to survive.
90% of my fishing is from basically around the north end of Vancouver Island up to the Alaskan border. That is where almost all my product comes from, And you see it's like 20 to 30% of that ground closed, but if you look at the productivity of the ground they're closing, really, you might as well consider it to be a lot higher than that, because what they are closing is areas that we catch. It might only be 20 to 30% of the coast, but it's where about probably 70 to 80% of our fish is caught. So if all of a sudden you need to go to an area where there just isn't the type of fish you're trying to catch, and you fish and grind away on it, it's just, you might come home with not enough fish. Like, example, like what I'm doing today with my dog sales, we have to come home with a certain amount of fish to supply all of our pre-orders for our customers, and maybe it means that we just come home and we don't have enough, and it's like we got to turn customers away.
Despite all the uncertainty, the doom and gloom, and looming economic squeeze, for commercial fishermen like Zeke and the industry more broadly, there appeared to be a light at the end of the tunnel. The government expressed a willingness to hear a counter-proposal, one that would meet their, however debatable, ecological targets, while reducing the economic impact to coastal communities and the fishermen themselves. It was from this effort that the Marine Planning Team was created. Comprised of 4 individuals with extensive experience in fisheries management and a shared passion to see the industry survive.
So we did that. That was our role. We met with over 700 fishermen over about a 6-month period throughout the coast, where we got the fishermen to decide, okay, if you have to achieve all of these different targets for ecological protection, how would you do it?
I think this MPT team did like 30 plus interviews, and they went to Hardy and Rupert and Alert Bay and Nanaimo many times, and all kinds of places. And these were, not just people yelling at each other. These were working sessions where, people say, well, we can give up this area, but this area is really critical. Or this area is open now, but perhaps we can close this, okay? Because we can adapt if that's closed and things. So the fishermen were very insightful.
And through that process, through those 50 plus meetings with the industry, they came up with a single map that was equal to protection of the scenario 1 that was presented by the government and the partners, but minimize the economic impacts by $95 million a year, and reduce the lost employment by that was going to occur from scenario 1 by 80%.
Following an extensive series of town halls with fishermen up and down the coast, the Marine Planning Team, or MPT, was able to devise an alternate map, one that still met the closure requirements of the government, but that reduced economic impacts by 77%. Although, to their surprise, the Trudeau government didn't seem to care.
So that was presented to the government I think in March of 2020. We didn't hear back from them for over a year. Essentially, we did hear back. They had ignored all the advice, and they were developing a scenario 2, which turned out to be not only not much different than scenario 1, but actually worse.
They took what we said and just swept it under the rug, and basically cherry-picked all the ground that we said that was important to us, and they included that in the areas that they're going to close.
Not only did the government ignore all feedback from fishermen and their families, they didn't even have the decency to carry out an economic analysis of their own, and actually presented a slightly revised scenario that was even worse. Seemingly content with the endorsement from various environmental groups and unmoved by the plight of those with the most to lose. But what exactly was driving the government's decision-making? Was it grounded in science and expert advice from DFO, or was it just more politics?
I'm not sure where scenario 1 came from.
Was I guess what you were saying?
Well, I think I mean, things people just sat in a corner and came up with this, right? So
I don't know what's driving it, but what I can say is, even at my time at DFO in stock assessment, there was no communication and no attempt from the group that was doing the spatial planning to talk to the stock assessment science people to say how can this be integrated?
For many ecosystems, particularly coastal ecosystems, fisheries are probably the least threatening. Again, the conservation groups have glommed on to fishing as this giant threat that's destroying the oceans. And so just closing areas to fishing has become the goal rather than one way to solve a problem.
I definitely feel like it's political from Ottawa. It's like, you know, Justin just wants to be, oh yeah, check that off. We got our MPAs in there. We're going to be, you know, 30% by 2030, and it's disgusting for me.
You think are they driven by science, or are they political decisions?
Those are totally political decisions. And you know, I think that the commercial fishery in BC is being used as a political pawn. It's a lot easier for Trudeau's Liberals to take something from the BC fishery because they're not going to lose any votes by taking anything from BC.
You think it's a science-driven solution or just a political decision?
I think that it's driven politically.
Do you think this would happen on the east coast of Canada?
No, it wouldn't. That's why they're doing it to us. They're afraid to do it over there.
They wanted to make a big splash announcement about protecting 30% of the ocean. It just so happens like 40% of the protection is going on the west coast and about 5% on the east coast. And it's all a result of how many seats the Liberals have on the east coast as compared to the west coast. I mean, anybody can connect those dots.
You know, fisheries are so deeply ingrained in eastern Canada that you can't push those guys around. The west coast, it's much less so. And you know, if you just look at the number of voters in British Columbia who have a fisheries connection, you know, it's minuscule.
British Columbia makes up 8.7% of the marine waters in Canada, but we've already protected 35% of the waters in the Pacific. They've only done about 10% in the Atlantic region and about 15% in the Arctic.
This is before these changes?
These are before the Northern Shelf bioregion comes into play.
Already 30%?
35%.
35%.
Yeah.
Despite having less than 10% of Canada's coastline, British Columbia has bore the brunt of the federal government's plans to create a network of underwater parks that are now set to be expanded to BC's other 2 bioregions as well. Interestingly, in the 3 ridings most affected by their decision, the Liberals failed to get even 14% of the vote, while in Atlantic Canada, which has remained relatively unscathed, the Liberals elected 24 MPs during the last election. But while the current government might be able to survive without the support of coastal BC, for the thousands of ordinary fishery workers affected by these closures, who rely on the industry to put food on our table as well as their own, the challenges ahead are daunting indeed.
I know hundreds of fishing families. I know the fathers, and I've watched their children grow up to be fishermen as well. And I've watched them come for advice from the senior people in the industry and invest in the industry. At the advice of the senior ones that said, this industry is sustainable. Look at the management tools. Look at the monitoring program. It's here for your children as well. And then this came along. I can't tell you how many people are fearing total bankruptcy. They've leveraged everything in their life, and they're not being respected at all. We're supposed to sit here and accept these significant losses to our culture, our lifestyle, our livelihoods, and the future of our families' livelihoods. But for the people on these docks down here, it's huge. It's everything. Nothing's bigger to them. For them, it's the equivalent of the collapse of Atlantic cod. But only difference is there's no transition plan. There's no government here to help you.
So what we're going to be doing here today is we have the North Vancouver Island Chefs Association preparing and serving halibut. At the same time, telling people that this is the most sustainable fishery in the entire world, why it's the most sustainable fishery, and why Canadians should be proud of this fishery.
And this is actually fish that you guys caught. We had it with you a couple weeks ago now, and so you've seen these fish before.
I've personally handled every fish here today, and I'm happy to provide it for the festival. And it's great to be here. It's a great cause. So how could I say no?
It's really hard work, but it's work that is very enjoyable for me. It's very free.
Sometimes you get caught up in life at home, and you go have ups and downs. But the ocean's always been home to me. We feel better when I'm out in the water. You feel better when you leave home, and you realize how much you value things that you really care about.
Our people have been involved in fishing for thousands of years and trading in fish for thousands of years with other neighboring nations, neighboring communities. And we would hope to be involved in the fishery for 1,000 more years.
Do you think just seeing all the energy here and everyone getting these meals, it would be quite a shame if BC lost this, if we lost this industry?
Oh, it'd be terrible if this industry went away. Not only because I love it and I work it, but also through reconciliation with Indigenous communities. And this is something that is, in my mind, unique to Canada and unique to the West Coast. So why wouldn't we continue it? Why wouldn't we foster it? Why wouldn't we develop it in a rich and healthy, sustainable way? It just makes the most sense to me.
People need some certainty in their life. And I've watched a lot of young families living this uncertainty while still fishing.
That's really all we are, is we're a small family business that are trying to run a small little boat and just make enough to earn a living and support our family and feed people amazing quality seafood. We want conservation. We just want it to be done in a way that allows us to still have a functional industry. And I always say we can't be fishermen if there are no fish. And we're looking long term. We're talking about our children, right? We want to be able to continue to fish. We need fish to be able to fish.
What's your favorite food?
Salmon.
Salmon?
Yeah.
Oh, don't eat away all your profits.
Daddy better catch some salmon for you.
Last word to you guys. Do you hope there's a big fishing industry in 20 years when you're older? So you can work on it? Lots of fish in the ocean?
Yeah.